It's another Friday afternoon, Tim, and I am ready for today's meeting.
Oh, good, good. So, what are we going to talk about today?
I think we're going to talk about leadership. I know we covered this a fair amount last year in our last season's podcasts. We touched on leadership every so often, but I thought with the PMBOK 7, I know when we talked earlier with the PMBOK 7 models that came out, it just seems to make a lot more sense, I think, now to kind of hone in on how the new PMBOK instructions, directions, guidance are coming along.
Yes, especially in the role of leadership and leading groups of people.
Yeah. And I think if we can, what I'd really like to do is talk about today is leading rather than just directing or managing. And I think we've made that distinction in the past. I think we've been pretty good at that. So, if we can just do that again, that'd be great. I know, I talked about this last year as an example, but years ago, I was asked to come in on an advisory perspective on a very, very large state government IT project. And part of it was that they wanted they wanted some gray hairs, what they really wanted to help them understand kind of how to move forward. But here's part of my contract with them said that I was not allowed to direct their staff. Now, if you really put that into perspective, here I am advising their staff, but I couldn't direct their staff. And what I learned over the course of actually not very many weeks is that by putting in some of the concepts, putting into place, into practice, some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today, the influence that I was able to place on that project in such a way that the staff who was not directly reporting to me, yet responded to me as though they were. And I think it's part of that is leadership versus the kind of the management directive, the management responsibilities. And so, if that makes sense, I'd like to use that as our launching pad.
Let's do that. And I observed the same. I had been a consulting project manager for about 5.5 years. And I had a staff for me, right? I had a purchasing manager, I had an attorney, I had an admin, I had two finance people, a business analyst, and they were all helping me run really fast and get things done. And all of a sudden, consulting went away, and I went into a weak matrix organization. And I had to figure out how to actually influence and lead instead of direct and advise, like you were saying. And I had a very similar experience. How can I actually do this in such a tricky way? And I took Drucker's information of management, but I actually was looking at Stephen Covey's leadership. That's where I first was introduced to the concept of how do you lead without telling people what to do? And
Well,
especially when it comes to team, it's important.
and how do you lead without having the direct authority to be able to lead? On paper, the org chart didn't have me in that top box.
Right. It's you don't have the rank behind it to tell
Yeah.
people this is a person to listen to. So I always go back to Star Trek. Remember the Next Generation. If you're not a Star Trek follower, there that it's real simple. In Starfleet Academy, every officer has to go through this university in order to be an officer on a Federation ship. But let's see, I forget what his name is, but he was the gardener, and everybody went to the gardener. And they didn't talk to the professors or the head of the academy or anything else. They always talked to the gardener. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to be that gardener?
Well, it would. And then just going back to the kind of the little story I just related, what was interesting to me was when I saw that clause in my contract, the first thought was, well, how do I, in fact, get this staff to work if I don't have direct authority? But my second thought, and I think what helped me along the way was, wow, I don't have direct authority. That takes away a lot of the headaches from the personnel side. and allows me to focus just on the job at hand and to bring them along with me. And I think in some ways, the whole idea of becoming an influencer versus an authoritarian figure was an easier task from that perspective.
It is. And we don't learn that until we learn the mechanics of leadership. For many reasons, but it's a fascinating little discovery, isn't it? Now,
It is.
to go on,
Mhm.
let's create a real big differentiator. Let's talk about the difference between a group of people and a team. I know you have some very, very specific ideas around this. What are those ideas?
Well, I do. And a group of people can become a team once they are brought together in a sort of a collaborative environment so that they're working towards a common mission or a very specific objective. And in doing so, they have separate tasks that are independent, but they're also interdependent. So a group of people without that sort of thing is just a group of people. That's people standing in the corner trying to get into the latest movie. That's a group of people. But a group of people with a common mission, specific objective with interdependent tasks becomes a team.
Common mission, specific objective. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another piece to that too. Usually a team is designated by a set of accepted and normal behavior, which means we're getting into the space of culture. So even if you do have a group of people who are in an office, if they don't share that accepted behavior and those norms, you may not have a team either.
That's true. You could have a team on paper, but not necessarily in function.
Right. And again, according to our, good practice, it's our job to ensure that number one, people act as a team. Number two, the team creates the results.
And the whole idea then is a team. And I left this part out probably on purpose, but the teams naturally have leaders. And yet I'm working on a project right now, advisory capacity, that is considered an agile project. And therefore a lot of the teams are set up as being self-organizing. So if they're self-organizing, why do we need a leader?
Yeah, that's the kick. We go back to prehistoric times, right? This is 12,000, 15,000 years ago, right? You have somebody who runs fast, somebody who's a great archer, somebody who's really strong, and somebody who's great with spears, right? And somehow they learn how to weave their skills together to become a great group of hunters. Why do you need a team leader for
That
that
leader.
type of a team?
I guess someone has to scare up the game as to say, what's our objective, right? And kind of set that plan in motion, I would think. By the way, in that situation that you just painted,
Uh-huh.
no matter how fast a runner I am not the one in front of that saber-toothed tiger. I'm sorry.
You know, and that's the thing. A leader is the one who establishes the environment, right? And establishes the ground rules for how the group's going to work together. They have to establish that. Now, it doesn't have to be the one in charge. And that's the funny thing. When outside of projects and business and project management, you don't have rank or authority, you have influence, right?
Yeah.
And for 6 to 8,000 years, that's how we've gotten business done. It's not through rank. It's through sitting back and being able to manage our emotional intelligence and also understand our relationships with other people and how to use those to our advantage. This is where real leadership comes in. It's not, like you say, it's not the designation of the tasks of a manager. It's creating the environment that a leader can actually help the team become more effective.
Well, in the example that I just recounted to kind of begin this podcast, um, and I kind of mentioned the fact that the team ended up coming to me de facto because I was able to help them along the course of getting their tasks done. But here's the other thing that I did. They had a leader that they or a manager that they were responsible to. That is for personnel issues, for task assignment, for timesheet sign off, for those kinds of things that you associate with management. What I did was I collaborated or partnered with that manager,
Mhm.
such that I was also able to train her. Not train is kind of it's kind of a formal way, but through influencing her as well, was able to create in her that specific positional situation where the team began to also naturally come to her for advice.
Yes, yes, and that can be called training, actually.
Yeah,
It's actually mentoring, and mentoring has no rank either.
that's true.
It's creating an opportunity to build a relationship such that you can hand over skills and knowledge and attributes in an ongoing conversation. Yeah, this is the hallmark of a leader, being able to create that and do it through influence and motivation too.
But but think
That's the beautiful thing.
but think about the idea that I kind of started off with, the idea of self-organizing teams. If you're a self-organizing team, you do not wait for your manager to assign work necessarily. Hopefully your manager has created that environment whereby you know where to find the next piece of work that you need to spend time with. There are situations where you come up with as a team the most efficient way to do the work. So if I'm a new project manager in that kind of situation and I have a reasonably mature team doing the work, what do you think I should be doing to really um, cast my vision on that situation or really actually earn my money? What should I be doing?
So number one, we're creating that environment so our team is successful.
Yeah.
Number two, we're supporting the team in its growth. We're making sure that the team has what they need to be successful, but also we're getting everything out of the way of the work.
I think
And
that's the key. I think
yeah,
that's
yeah, getting things out of the way of the work. You're right. Management has to be there. You have to have the bean counters and you have to have the understanding of progress and status and forecast. That's a requirement, but that's the discipline framework that we've been talking about. With that in place, all of a sudden you have this wonderful space of freedom within which you can delegate a lot of this technical stuff and you get to play a more executive role as a leader, not just a manager.
yeah. Oh, definitely. The other thing I find is, and I come from a situation now. A lot of my projects were what we call predictive, or those sort of hierarchical, sequential kind of long projects. But the other thing that came very relevant, both from my customer side and my own management side, is they wanted a single throat to choke, is how they would often put it.
Yeah, single point of contact. There's debate on that. How do you feel about single point of contact?
Well, in some ways, if that person has a lot of leadership abilities as well as a good management style, I don't mind that situation because it's much easier if I'm an executive or if I'm a client manager needing a status or needing something that's happening right now on the project. I don't want to be going through a 200 person or even a 20-person team to find out who's got the information. I want to go to one person and get the status transparently, unequivocally. I want to understand that status without hunting someone else down.
Yeah, it's that communication aspect.
Yeah.
It makes communication efficient and effective. And now, as a leader, all of a sudden we're realizing that one of our primary tools is communication, and that sharing of information. Number one, makes the work more successful. Number two, makes the work more recognizable and understandable to not just the team but the stakeholders.
Oh, absolutely. Most. And quite often, and it doesn't have to be, but quite often that leader is the one with the most experience. And they've been there, they've done that, they've been through some situations. So in some ways, they're able to also guide their self-organizing team when some of the situations become more difficult. So
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever get away from the fact that we need leadership.
No. When you have 6 to 10 people, there's going to be a leader vacuum. It just happens. I'm looking for some type of research or analysis that says there's a critical mass that says we're looking for someone to go to help us.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And when it gets up to 50 to 200, you start have to look for your hierarchy, and that's where you and I agree that politics start kicking in.
Yeah.
It's necessary when things get complex. It's just like a WBS in a project. You may have a 3-level WBS in a 6-week to 6-month project, but if you're going out 1 to 3 years with hundreds of work packages, you're going to get 4 and 5 levels. You have to.
And yeah, and exactly. A lot of predecessors, a lot of situations where there's a lot of entanglement of tasks. So that's always important. But given the fact that I've got a fairly mature, self-organizing team, I'm in this process. I now have more time to spend on care and feeding of that team to make them even more productive. What are some of the techniques do you think that we could help advise those listening to us right now in care and feeding of our teams?
Number one, assessment. Three sets of data that you're going to constantly collect. Number one, the project. Progress, status, and forecast. How is the project going? Is the work moving forward? That's job one.
Yeah.
And then you can go upstream for that from the team. And that's the health and the function of the team. And we'll talk about that in a while. And then number three is the engagement and the contributions of the individual team members. I've latched onto this in the last year and a half, and it seems to cover every aspect of issue, change, and other management components, but it also helps us from a leadership standpoint to assess the need of the project and teams and individuals.
No, that's good. The assessment part. And then I think what I heard when I heard you mention that, the first thought that popped into my mind was with that assessment comes the constant need for communication.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Communicate early, communicate often.
Yeah, the assessment includes a variance analysis, which means, okay, what's missing, right? Are
Right.
we missing knowledge? Do these people really understand the client? Are we missing skills? Do we need some retraining? Are we missing attributes? Is somebody acting in an irresponsible manner? And this is where we can't just pull an answer out of our back pocket. We need to know critical thinking. We need to know how to turn that specific set of data to specific information that's actionable.
Well, and not only that, I remember being frustrated as a young person, as a young IT developer and also analyst, of not being given the big picture by my project managers. And when I didn't
Yeah.
see the big picture, I would comfortably work on my tasks and deliver them, and then I find out I'd have to redo parts of them because I was never given the big picture. I remember going to a manager or two saying, if I had known that, I would have done this differently. You need to tell me what's going on. I can't just be given these little slivers in isolation, kind of in a siloed effect and not know what's going on around me. And so once I was able to help my manager understand what I needed from a communication aspect, the tasks went much better. I didn't have to redo so much.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that's the job of a leader, to provide the vision, right? To provide the why, the
Yeah.
purpose for the work. And number one, it gives people an understanding. Number two, it gives them an opportunity to say, I have another idea, which could
Yeah.
probably meet your objective more. And number three, motivate. People do work not because they enjoy the work. Well, that's part of it, right? But a big part is I get a paycheck. I feed my family. I have a house. I have a relaxing life outside of work. And also, on top of that, a piece of me is in the work. So I get to say, this is valuable, and it means at the same time, I'm valuable as well.
Well, and what's important about that too, and I learned this probably early on in my career, is that the people that are down in the trenches doing the work are smarter than I am as their manager. I may see the bigger picture, but they see the details, and if I just feed them that bigger picture, they can figure out that I can do this detail rather than this detail and get it done much quicker and much more accurately. So the communication is so important in that whole care and feeding of my team.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that's the thing. It's not us, quote unquote, leading the team. It's us enabling the team and giving what they need and getting out of the way, but continuing to assess and determine what is or might be getting in the way.
Well, and the other thing is, you and I talked, I think it was maybe last week or a couple of weeks ago, we kind of introduced something that you and I probably both learned in our MBA classes, something called the Tuckman model.
Yes.
And the idea is that you are, what is it? I think you're forming, then you're storming, then you're norming, then you're performing. And some of those stages last longer than other times. But I think and I want to kind of talk about those a little bit from a project manager's or from a leadership perspective, especially if you're a new leader. I think just the awareness of those four stages helps set you up much more for success than for being surprised when things happen and you weren't expecting it. Like in
You're
the
si-
starting stage, right?
yeah, you're 6 weeks into a project and all of a sudden people are bickering because some people have messy desks and some people are dripping coffee on other people's papers. It's like,
Yeah.
where did this come from? Oh, guess what? They feel comfortable around each other.
Yeah.
It's a natural occurrence. And think about project managers being surprised. Think about team members being surprised. Hey, this person didn't raise a ruckus a couple weeks ago. Why are they raising a ruckus now?
Yeah.
And to give them a reason why, maybe they feel comfortable with you. Maybe they feel they can let their guard down and share sensitive things, emotionally sensitive topics with you, and take it as a sense of pride that you're building a healthy relationship with them.
Yeah. Well, and the forming stage, the initial stage, I always call it the honeymoon period because everybody's kind of getting to know each other. And it's kind of almost like, maybe I should call it the first date period because you're kind of on your best behavior.
Yes.
But as time goes on, there is that jockeying for position. There's that I'm right, you're wrong. There's that. So you not only as a project manager need to understand that that's possibly or probably coming, but you also need to have ideas as to how to kind of smooth that down. It's going to happen and it's okay for it to happen, but let's use that to move forward rather than fall backwards as a team.
Yeah, my son was in scouts when he was young, and the scoutmaster, who had been a scoutmaster since the early 1960s, was always talking about teachable moments. And on campouts, he and a couple other adults and I would talk about the Tuckman model as it applies to boys setting up a camp and then the day before they have to get back home.
Yeah.
And it's so predictable. It really is. But with that storming, if you're prepared for and if you can observe it, you can get ahead of the curve and you can actually walk in with an opportunity to help them understand what conflict management is and the value of debate instead of argument.
Well, and I was just going to say exactly the same thing. During this period is the time you as a project manager or you as a leader should be watching most closely because you're going to see what's going to start to happen is you're going to see who rises to the top, who has weaknesses in what areas, and so the observations that you make now come in handy as the project progresses and you become that team that's very productive. But by filing those things away as you observe them in the conflict situation is very helpful as a project manager going forward.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And being able to help people through these minor conflicts. in this early forming nor storming stage um, gives us the preparation we need for when we get into the real ugly, big problems we're going to hit later on in the project.
Well, and by the time the big problems hit, and they will, that's when you want them to be well into norming and probably into performing. Because once you have the team, shall I use this analogy, functioning at all cylinders, firing at all cylinders, once you have the team moving that way, you can get hit with some pretty nasty difficulties or challenges and get through them as a team and keep moving the project forward.
Yeah, yeah. And these conflicts later on in the project are great in TV series and movies, but you want to be prepared and keep an even keel, not just inside yourself, but inside the team environment so that, they feel they have time to actually address these conflicts later on with the time and the effort that they demand.
Well, and that's exactly right. The other part about the care and feeding, and we talked about this on a couple of programs last year, but we talked about the whole idea of motivation. And the fact is that you as a project manager can't motivate someone to do something, but you can create the environment that they're allowed or that they can then motivate themselves. And I think if there's one thing that a project manager can do, or as a leader can do in any situation, it's to set up and create that environment whereby people can truly express themselves, have that job satisfaction, come up with that self-motivating way of being productive.
So I'm beginning to observe in my research, and we're going to explore this in months and years to come. There's two sources of motivation from a human being. It seems there's motivation through desire. I want that. And motivation as an outcome. Boy, that was a great ride. Let's do it again. And it seems that we can actually tap into both of those.
We can, and I think a lot of projects, for example, are set up to do exactly that. Probably more on the former part that you talked about, where there's a desire. So the salary obviously creates some motivation, but even that is only temporary because once you're achieving that salary for work put in, it loses its effect.
Right,
But I
right.
think with the thing about projects and the challenge, especially IT projects, the challenges that come with the projects, I don't know about you, but that's what gets my juices flowing. And I've seen that in my team members in terms of you give them a challenge, you let them work it out either by themselves or collaboratively. And wow, watch them go.
Yeah, yeah, there is some form of personal reward that's going on there. And it's not just achievement. It's the only word I have for it, and I don't have a definition yet, is fulfillment. My purpose is
Yeah.
now met.
Yeah.
I'm performing what I'm here on the planet for. That it's that self-actualization stuff that Maslow talked about.
Well, and if I, as a team member, can achieve mastery because you, as my leader, have allowed for me to achieve mastery, that's even more motivating for myself because once I master that area, I know you're going to let me master another area or, work on something else. And that constant challenge, that constant motivation from within really keeps me going.
We're going to have to talk about this in the future, but the questions are popping up in my mind all over the place. Training. What type of training is best in a project environment? What, what, how do we train? How much training should be in just a normal project? And so we may want to explore this in
I'd,
future
I,
projects.
I'd love to because I tell you what, some of the knock them out, drag them down kind of challenges I've had with my own management are on the fact that they want to spend project dollars on only technical training. And I want to spend some of those project dollars on some of the soft skills because soft skilled professionals are more effective in the way that they do their work. So
Yeah, give me general specialists all the time. Give me
absolutely.
general specialists, the guys who sort through the trash and learn to put it together to make the tools we need.
Well, how about the shy, um, introverted, highly technical delivery specialist who relates to code more than people? And you bring that person along, maybe in a public speaking course or something, such that suddenly that person is leading teams in their ability to relate to them through their communication style. Can you imagine the difference that makes from that shy,
This is
introverted person here versus the one who's now leading because of their newfound ability?
So this is what this is what my mentor did back in the mid 2000s. We were going to a lot of conferences, right? We had a lot of money to spare, and we're going to technical conferences. And he would usually take two or three entry level engineers, and many of them were speaking English as a second language. And he'd actually give them a competition, or he'd give them a challenge like, if you bring me more than 3 CXO business cards by the end of the night, I'll treat you to a good dessert. And he was forcing them to professionally introduce themselves to executive leaders in order to influence. And this is a powerful skill and a powerful way to actually do it. And it's training that you can just sort of build into the work.
Well, and it also helps them accept responsibility. It helps them become there's a feeling of acceptance and belonging with those newfound skills. There's just a feeling of confidence in their ability to come in every morning with their head held high, knowing that they're going to be successful that day.
You're right. Now, this brings me to another thought, though. Um, we're talking about leadership in a general term. You've been playing with Agile for a while now, and what is your aspect on leadership comparing traditional and Agile teams?
Well, if I look at the technical approach, obviously most of my experience has been in the more traditional, what we call predictive processes. And those tend to be linear in execution. They tend to be situations where you use a planning phase, for example, to set those clear expectations and communicate those, to establish clear responsibilities, to establish accountability to timelines and milestones. So there's a very um, almost hierarchical, linear kind of sequence to that kind of technical approach to managing. Whereas what I found with the agile, and again, I'm reasonably green in the agile, but I am observing the whole idea around self-organizing teams. The teams tend to be smaller. There tends to be greater interaction between not just like-minded or like tasked individuals, but kind of across the team, where one team is composed of delivery people, client experts, testing people, training people, the whole thing. There tends to be more collaboration. And as a result, there has to be more flexibility so that, requirements may change, responsibilities, priorities may shift. So it's in many ways, it's a looser form of technical management, but it's also kind of satisfying way of managing a project. So you kind of go with it's not really go with the flow, but it's allowing you to create a flow.
Yeah, and there is one facet of project management that does not differentiate between predictive and agile. It's called human behavior.
Yes. That's true.
So what I've thought about and what I've learned, I started adopting agile, certain aspects of agile and scrum in my projects back in 2007 and 2008. And what I've observed is that these quote unquote new ways of approaching the management and leadership of teams are necessary when the work is unknown, but when the work is known, they can also enhance the results of the project. Again, having a bunch of people who are very comfortable and quickly form a functional team in such a way that they can work out most of the problems and they use you as a resource for moving the work forward.
Well, and you'll notice that when I gave you my um, definition or my contrast between the two, I very strategically said the technical aspects of managing the
Yes.
project.
Yes. Yes.
Because you're absolutely correct. Human behavior is human behavior. And those soft skills that I had kind of mentioned before, and some that we have talked about, for example, emotional intelligence, communication styles, all of those kinds of things, those do not change, in my belief, between whatever management process you're using to run your IT projects.
Yeah. And the codification of the Agile Manifesto does not did not mean that this style of leadership came into being with Agile. It means that it brought it to the forefront in these certain criteria where it's beneficial in other aspects, where you can get away with, basically directing people in a more predictive model.
Well, if you think about it, and you've mentioned this before, that agile really is the way that we've always lived our lives. It just so happens to be now we've formalized it in the work environment. But if I think of what my Saturday morning looks like, I'll tell my wife, for example, I told her today that this Saturday I'm devoting to yard work, garden work, all that. Do I know what that looks like today? Do I have a project plan in terms of what sequence I'm going through, going to go through on Saturday? No, I just know that there is some idea of what it means to work in the yard all day Saturday.
Mhm.
And it will be handled in an agile way depending on what's happening at that moment on that day.
Right, right, right. And then bringing this back into a business context, then the role of the project manager is to allow this rolling wave, but making sure that these things like quality and risk don't slip through the cracks.
That's
And
right.
these analytical tools can still apply. With your retrospectives and with your stand-ups and reviews, you're capturing all this data, and you may not have the same data, but you have the same earned value formulas that you can apply to different data sets, and you can still use this same mindset. It's really funny how a lot of project management does change when you move into this model, but you have agile, but a lot of it doesn't.
So you and I had at one time talked a little bit about the talent triangle within, and I think it was in the earlier versions, and it's being recalibrated now by PMI. But how do you think the talent triangle fits into what we've just been talking about?
Let's go back to 2015. Okay. So the sixth edition of PMBOK had yet to be out. It was going to be published in 2017. And here comes PMI, and they say, we've been doing surveys with project managers and businesses, and we've been talking to the Standish Group, and we're looking into the future, and we're saying, okay, we've been talking about this technical project management. Guess what? You're going to have to double down in leadership, and you're going to have to double down in business acumen.
Yeah.
And nobody was figuring out where that was coming from. Um, but it was interesting to see that. And lo and behold, in 2017, they released the sixth edition. And the sixth edition says, oh, here's Agile. Here's our traditional project management. We're going to start calling that predictive. But in all of these knowledge areas, here's what you need to consider for an agile approach. And then in the back of the sixth edition PMBOK, they said, let's look at the process groups and how they look at across agile, initiating, planning, and executing. And by the way, we have an Agile practice guide that we're launching at the same time. And we've been working with Agile Alliance, and they've given us. So you have to understand that, PMI was going in a strategic direction here, even as far back as 2015.
Yeah. No, I believe that's true. When I looked at the triangle, the talent triangle, again, whether we're talking about traditional project management versus the kind of an agile approach. I think this talent triangle, the way that it's kind of defined, really fits both models or even the hybrid model, because it kind of takes the project manager one step kind of away from the details and says, okay, how do I apply? I think you mentioned business acumen. How do I apply business acumen in this situation? I don't care what methods I'm using. Or how do I apply my leadership skills? Again, I don't care what methods I'm using. The only time I care is in the part of the triangle that deals with ways of working, technical aspects of project management. So I'm kind of liking this whole way that they've defined that and have kind of superimposed that onto what we do on a daily basis.
Yes, I do as well. And we're going to see some changes coming up in the next few months that are going to be really fascinating, because all of a sudden with the 7th edition, they said two big things, right? They said this applies at a higher level than the work level, which means it applies to both predictive and agile. And number two, this isn't just for project managers.
I like
That was, yeah, and that was like, wow, this is a handbook I can actually release to the workers, the stakeholders, and everybody, and get them curious about this stuff.
Well, think about that. If you get the stakeholders on that path with you, who are the ones with the purse strings, the ones with the overall overarching vision, the ones with the authority. I mean, if you get them marching on that same path with you, what a nice way to then bring your project along inside that kind of cocoon that they're creating, so that the project has much more success and much more what would I say? Much more I don't know, kind of influence from them, support from them, from the stakeholders.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Again, it's just like our teams. Our teams work better when you have the answer to why. So why would we think stakeholders are any different? They're human beings too. And giving them the purpose, training and mentoring your stakeholders. We do it all the time. We just don't know that it's called that.
Right. Well, and the last couple of weeks we've talked, probably the last 3 weeks, we've kind of looked at some of the new ways of dealing with ideas within project management, specific to the introduction of principles and domains and methods and artifacts and all of the kinds of things that we're kind of familiar with, but now have a definition in terms of the latest edition. I guess my question is, how do those things that we've talked about in the past, some of those, relate directly to what we're now talking about, leadership and teams?
So the first statement is team is a domain.
Right.
It's an area to which we apply our principles. And it's also an area that while we're applying our principles, we use certain methods, models, and artifacts. And that's how it works together, right? And if you look at certain principles, it makes a lot of sense. Some is we have to sort of interpret them, like create a collaborative environment, being a steward, engaging stakeholders, focusing on value. All of these make sense. But what about recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions? What does this mean?
I guess the way I remember talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I think to me that's sort of implying that common sense, that systems thinking, that looking around. If I make this decision, what else does it affect around me? Again, you apply that ability within your team and get your entire team thinking that way. You have much greater positive decisions made than wrong decisions.
Yeah, if you think of the phrase system interactions,
Yeah.
how the pieces of the system talk to each other and impact and influence each other, the one word that comes to my mind immediately is integration. And all of a sudden, that falls into place. We are the integrator. We're the captain of the ship or the director of the orchestra, and we can actually enable our teams to take on that mindset as well. This isn't just a mindset that's good, um, you know, on a ship or in an orchestra, right? You're telling the timpani player, "Hey, be quiet over here because there's a flute solo," or you're talking to the guy at the front of the ship, trim the jib here a little bit, but not too much because we're going to see a wind come up. And this is again an opportunity number one for us to give a reason for our direction of actions, but also it's an opportunity. It's a teachable moment where we can say, if you look at the big picture, these small actions may be silly, but they really are meaningful.
Well, and the other thing I like is tailoring. It's sprinkled all through Pinbox 7. Actually, it probably was sprinkled into 6, just not as relevant, just not as visible. But what I also like about 7 and things we've already talked about in terms of regardless of the context of your project, you're able to tweak different aspects so that you tailor it specific to the context you're in. Tailoring to me is one of those best parts of this whole approach where we can work with our team and their skills and their abilities and their wanting to move the project forward in such a way that it all kind of clicks much better. So I like the whole idea of tailoring as well and applying it.
Yeah, and an aspect of tailoring that's a little bit tricky, but is very teachable is what aspects of the project are flexible and which aspect of the project are inflexible. And even you, the project manager, may not know this. So this is a collaborative exploration, and engaging the team in this gives them an opportunity to raise potential issues that we wouldn't have expected.
And that was when I was reading the PMBOK too, it talked about methods, and one of the methods being data gathering and analysis. And the
Hmm.
first thing your mind goes says, "Oh, that's numerical. That's earned value. That's all this other stuff that we need to do." What if I spent some time data gathering in terms of the qualitative aspects of how my team is performing? It doesn't all have to be numbers. I can see what might be bothering that person, where the conflict might be over here. So if I'm doing data gathering and analysis, I've always got my antenna up as to how my team is performing and collaborating together.
To tell you how long I've been in project management, I remember when they created the stakeholder knowledge area, and they added two extra processes. They took stakeholder engagement management. They took two processes from communication, and they added a couple new ones in there and created a new knowledge area. And it was the birth of that knowledge area where they started saying things like, there's a bunch of behavioral science here where we can actually do formal analysis and assess the engagement needs of our stakeholder and the engagement style that's appropriate. And we can actually, upon that assessment, figure out what our desired engagement for them are. And it all stems from what you're talking about. It's not just a quantitative assessment, it's a qualitative assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tim, let's say I'm a young project manager listening to these two old guys talk about philosophies and their experiences. But I want to know from you, Tim, and me, Merv. I want to know as a young project manager, what's the best way to begin to learn, to build a team, to lead a team? Where should I start? Where do I start?
Well, it's sort of like learning how to be around CXOs. And it's basically entering their role, and entering their room, their territory. You visit them, and when you're visiting another country, you don't impress your culture on them. You learn to assess and analyze their culture and bring it in. So even if you are right now just a project facilitator or expediter, um, collect the knowledge that you're doing with the teams and do your assessment and figure out what's working and what's not for them. You don't have to advise them or anything, but you can at least, gather data and start learning that aspect of leadership, the assessment, and also the trying to predict a better outcome and how to get to that. Um, do that to yourself too. And remember, the team members are nothing more than yourself. It's just like all other aspects of leadership. We all start learning leadership by leading ourselves first and figuring out what works with us.
Well, and I think that's what helped me along my path as well as a project manager is that even when I was young, I would put myself in the shoes of those who I was leading. And it wasn't that long prior to that where I was sitting in their chairs or walking in their shoes. So it didn't take much for me to remember how I was treated versus how I needed to treat others to get the most productivity and basically the most fun out of working together as a team. So what you're saying is exactly right. If you put yourself in their shoes, put yourself in their chairs, remember what it was like when you were there, and then act accordingly, it's much easier to then begin to develop those leadership skills and the team skills that you need to be able to lead that team.
And again, it's that quantification of human behavior. It's a self-awareness, awareness of myself. How do I click? How do I behave? What motivates me? What inspires me? And also emotional intelligence. What are my triggers? How do my emotions play a role in my decisions? And my relationships. How do I use my relationships? And how do I effectively use them? And how can I more effectively use them? And you're teaching yourself that unless you have approachable mentors around you. And that's where I would suggest people go first if they can.
Well, exactly. Get a good mentor, and after a while, become a mentor. I learned more when I became a mentor than I learned a lot from my mentor, but when I became a mentor, I had to really think through how I was passing on my wisdom. Sometimes it wasn't so wise, but how I was passing on, it really made me think.
Yeah, it's learning that your communication style is not the world's communication style. And it's basically, coming back to what you first said, which is, considering the other people and thinking about the other people and putting yourself in their shoes.
I forget the phrase you had used, but it made me think that part of what we do too is set that good example. If I want my team to have core hours between the hours of 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., and I want them all to be there so that they can structure their lives around those core hours, then I better be there between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. I can't just take a 3 hour lunch and come back and say, how's it going, folks? So there's that whole aspect of being the example that you expect from those you're leading.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So where would you go to learn more of this? We've said generally, but are there any books or any YouTubes or anything that you like to refer back to a lot?
Well, actually I do. And here's the other part. I should have mentioned this in the previous segment. And that was the fact that be a constant learner, always learning. And I tell you what, my system that I've got here at home is set up in such a way that I'm getting pinged with exactly the kinds of things I need. Whether it's and I don't know if I'm saying this right, whether it's a Udemy course that I want to take in this very specific aspect, or if there's a community college course that I want to sit in on for 6 weeks, or if there's a book, emotional intelligence is a book that I can go back to over and over again. You mentioned Drucker's Effective Executive. Those are the kinds of books that you can never get tired of learning from reading. And every time you read it, after you've had some experience, you go back and say, "Why didn't I see that before?" It's because you weren't ready. Yeah, be a constant learner. Get those you. And by the way, we always say, where can you find us? LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an incredible place. Find those mentors on LinkedIn, follow them, and try out some of the experimentation that they offer.
Yeah, yeah, I do that constantly. I look at business influencers a lot, like Ryan Holiday and Simon Sinek and Tim Ferriss and those people. And it's not that they are so wise, it's that they bring really interesting people together, and it's the conversation, the collaboration of these people that are actually the most inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, find that person that speaks to where you want to be in your career, and don't just follow him like a guru necessarily, because there's aspects of them that perhaps you can't relate to. But look for those areas, and not just one place. Get 2 or 3 or 4 different mentors in that way, so that you can collaborate, or so that you can coalesce all of their ideas and say, "This works for me, this won't."
Yes, yes. And like you said, learn how to learn. I think if I were to teach anything outside of project management, I would start teaching people critical thinking, the path to self awareness and emotional intelligence, and self discipline.
That's true. And you mentioned systems thinking before.
Yes.
Systems thinking, critical thinking, common sense thinking, whatever you want to call it. Just the whole aspect of how am I going to relate to people and really think through the repercussions of all of my decisions that I make.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So in order to land this, where can we relate with you outside of this show?
I already said LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Find
that's
me.
that's a good
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. No, it's a great place to collaborate. To me, LinkedIn is not the place to say, "Hi, I'm an expert in this. Want to buy my services?" That may happen over time, but you need to develop those relationships. And why not develop them from a mentorship aspect? Whether I mentor you or you mentor me, there's that synergy that comes as a result of people who are after the same thing in their career.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Until next week, then.
Thanks again, Merv. And thanks for everybody for checking in and looking forward to talking to you next week.